Town Hall series now on the first and third Thursdays of every month, starting at 6 o'clock on all our social media channels. And if you don't have social media, call our office. We'll give you a dial-in number. Tonight, I'm not going to do my usual overview of the COVID-19 situation in Oakland. If you've been reading the paper or listening to the news, you know that our state is experiencing a tremendous surge in cases, in hospitalizations, and in fatalities. And every leader is asking everyone to reimagine how you are going to celebrate the 4th of July this year, as we have to forego family gatherings and our typical celebrations. We also have found ourselves in what many find an inspiring moment of reimagining public safety and racial justice. And tonight we have two phenomenal special guests that are going to talk about efforts in Oakland that really have national significance. First, we're going to hear from one of my very favorite mayors, and I get to work with them all, and that is Stockton's Mayor, Michael Tubbs. Mayor Tubbs and I are part of the Big City Mayors Coalition of California, otherwise known as the Big 13. We have been, I'd say, policy soulmates on many, many things. And one of those things is a desire that everyone in America have a basic guaranteed income to not just end poverty, but to also do away with the unacceptable disparities by race in wealth. And then second tonight, we're going to hear from David Harris, the CEO of the Urban Strategies Council right here in Oakland. David and Urban Strategies Council has just concluded a year-long planning process for Oakland to stand up macro. This is a model that cities throughout the country are just now beginning to talk about. A trauma-informed, community-based response to 911 calls that don't involve police, but rather medics, trained clinicians, social workers, people that are there to deliver care, not enforcement. So let's get right to it. Let's start off with the amazing Michael Tubbs, Mayor of Stockton, California. Welcome, Mayor Tubbs. It is so great to be with you tonight. Thanks for sharing yourself with Oakland this evening.
No, thank you so much, Mayor Schaaf. In fact, confession to make, two of my favorite restaurants, or three, are in Oakland. There's like a Burmese food place I like in Oakland. There's 10 Ethiopian spots I like in Oakland. And then there's a Jamaican food spot that I like in Oakland. And Everett & Jones, of course, like hello. So no, thank you so much for having me, and thank you for your leadership during this time. And hello, I'm Oakland. I'm sure some of your cousins and friends and families and relatives are my constituents, so there's kinship between our two cities. So I'm here to talk a little bit about what sounds like a radical notion around abolishing poverty, but it's actually really rooted in the American story. Thomas Paine in the late 1700s talked about the need for an income guarantee in the Agrarian Revolution. This was like in the late 1700s. Dr. King talked about this and where do we go from here? Chaos Our Community, written in the backdrop very similar to this one, where there was massive civil unrest as he grappled with how do you deal with the evils of white supremacy and how that permeates into the economic conditions and realities of people of color and Black people in specificity. But it also has deep Oakland roots. In the Black Panthers Party 10-point plan, number 2 says we need a job guarantee and or a guaranteed income, meaning that this is not some new idea. This is not something that a bunch of tech bros figured out. This is something that's actually deeply rooted in the civil rights tradition and the tradition of making sure that we provide universal human dignity to everyone who calls the United States home. So I remember reading about this concept in college while studying Dr. King and being really confused as to why was I never taught that. As someone who grew up with a single mother who struggled and still struggling, I knew that economic insecurity wasn't cute, it wasn't fun, and it wasn't enjoyable. And I also realized that the folks like us who work incredibly hard, but that work's not paying, particularly for folks who live in California, where you have rising rents, high cost of living, high cost of everything, and minimum wage, just above minimum wage, or even jobs that aren't minimum wage, hasn't been paying what's necessary. And we see that because even before COVID-19, 1 out of every 2 Americans cannot afford one $400 emergency. And I think given the time we're in now, not just with civil unrest, but with this global health pandemic, the worst we've seen since 1918, that it necessitates bold action. And we're operating with a social safety net that was created in the last Great Depression in the 1930s. We can't operate in 2020 with a 1930s understanding of what our societal obligations are to each other or what our social contract looks like. So all that was to say, 18 months ago, we launched a basic income demonstration in Stockton, where we were able to give 125 randomly selected families that look like the city $500 a month for 18 months. And what we found is that, number one, people are people, meaning that the folks spent $500 like how you spent $500 over the past 18 months. A lot of it on food, a lot of it on utilities, a lot of it on rent, and a lot of it on coping with unexpected emergencies. There's countless stories like of Laura, who worked hard. She actually worked in the Coliseum, but lived in Stockton. SEIU worker. She ended up getting disability and not being able to work. But her bills never took a disability. So she was still having to keep up with cost of living and rent increases without being able to work. Not because she was lazy, not because she was waiting for a handout, not because she didn't have drive, but because she was literally disabled and was physically unable to work. And she talks about how over the past 18 months, the $500 has been a life raft of sorts. It allowed her to buy Thanksgiving dinner and prepare for her family. It allowed her to deal with the rising cost of her apartment. It allowed her to buy new stuff when her apartment building caught on fire. And then there's Tomas, a young man with 2 kids who worked retail and said that the $500 was enough for him to be able to interview for a better job. And at first I was a little bit worried, and I said, well, Tomas, they said that folks would spend money on dumb things. So why would you spend 500 months on the interview? And he said, no, Mayor Tubbs, I work in a job that doesn't give pay time off. I don't have vacation days like that. So if I don't work, I don't eat, I lose money. So I couldn't apply for these other jobs or interview for these other jobs because I couldn't take that risk. But that $500 was enough for me to take a risk on myself. And he was able to get a union job, work less hours, stable schedule, and take more care of his kids. And then there's folks like Zane, who was working who had a job during the 18 months. But like so many of us, during COVID-19, through no fault of her own, she wasn't fired, she was laid off. And she applied for unemployment insurance. And for 3 months, she has yet to receive her unemployment check. But her bills didn't take a break, her expenses didn't take a break, life didn't take a break. And she talks about how the $500 was enough for her to be able to persist during this time. And that's literally what this conversation is about. And that's why we've launched, and Mayor Schaaf is one of the founding members of the Mayors for Guaranteed Income Network. It comes from a lived reality that poverty should not exist in a 21st century civilized society because it is indeed a choice, but not a choice by individuals. It's a policy choice. That a guaranteed income is not the panacea for everything, but it is an important tool to fight economic insecurity and to fight racial injustice. And 3, that the time has come, that COVID-19 has illustrated to us that folks can't shelter in place if they have nowhere to live, that folks can't shelter in place without stress and anxiety if they don't have enough to pay the rent, that we have essential workers, mostly Black and brown folks out in our communities, risking their lives in the interest of being an essential worker, and still after shifts having to line up in food banks, not because they're lazy, not because they don't care, but because they're not being paid enough. So again, to be very clear, a guaranteed income fits squarely with what other things we need to do. We need to have affordable housing for all. We need to have affordable childcare for all. We need health care for all. Healthcare is a right. We need to raise the minimum wage so it reflects the cost of living in the Bay Area or the cost of living in Stockton. And we also need a guaranteed income, that we don't have to pick and choose between these ideas, because we deserve all of them. And I forgot I had slides. So let's just go to my let's go to my last slide. And I'll conclude with saying that the time has come. What we have seen in the past 18 months in Stockton for just 125 families has illustrated that, again, the issue with economic insecurity is not that people don't know how to manage money. The issue with economic insecurity is not that people aren't working. The issue with economic insecurity is not that it's too costly to fix that. The issue with economic insecurity is that folks don't have cash, but there are ways to rectify that. And we've seen how immoral some of the decisions we make as a society are, where during COVID-19, so many people are teetering on the edge of economic collapse. But the top 1%, the billionaires, have made even more money during a time where we're itching towards another Great Depression. We know we have to fix something when the top 1/10 of 1% of Americans own 90% of the country's wealth. And we know we have to fix something because folks are in the streets saying, we demand and we deserve better. So for more information about the demonstration in Stockton, you can go to stocktondemonstration.org. There's the research questions, the research design, there's spending data for every month. I want to spend my time just to talk about what we deserve and some of the theoretical underpinnings, because again, in 2017, we found $2 trillion in a universal basic income for the top 1% and for corporations through the Trump tax cuts. And if we repeal those today, as Senator Harris has proposed through her LIFT Act, we could give every family today in America $500 a month, just through repealing that tax cut. Right now, there's a bill in the Senate authored by Senator Harris and Senator Sanders that provide $2,000 a month in COVID relief to every American, and that has to be part of the nearest CARES Act package. So again, in this moment, you have a coalition of mayors, including your mayor, the mayor of Oakland, Libby Schaaf, who are advocating for a guaranteed income, with the understanding that it's not a panacea, but that it is an important tool, and a tool that we have to use as we think about the type of society we deserve to live in. So again, Mayor Schaaf, thank you so much for having me. I'm so sorry to my staff. I did not use the slides, but I think the three top line messages are: number one, guaranteed income is not going to change the fabric of our country. It will actually make our country more aligned with our values. Number two, we can trust each other to spend money, just like we trust rich people all the time with tax cuts to spend money. And then number three, this is rooted in our legacy. This is what the Black Panthers were talking about. This is what Dr. King was talking about. And at this time, we have the momentum, we have the leadership from folks like your mayor to actually make it happen, not for them, but for all of us. So again, thank you, Oakland. It's so great to be here with you.
Mayor Tubbs, thank you for being here. And, you got a few questions ahead of time. And I also want to right now put up the slide for thought exchange. If anybody has questions for Mayor Tubbs, this is the way that you can submit them. In fact, if you want to look at other people's questions or comments, you can vote them up or down. You can agree with them. The ones that get the highest votes will go to the top. I encourage you to focus on questions for Mayor Tubbs. We'll be running a thought exchange later about the macro program, and also general questions for me that I'm always happy to answer. But we only have Mayor Tubbs till 6:45 because he has a very cute baby to put to bed. So I want to be sure to use his time wisely. One of the questions I know we got ahead of time is, where does this money come from? And I'm sure, like Oakland, Stockton has had budget problems, but I can say from Oakland's perspective, absent, the city council deciding this is something that they would want to allocate funds for, and there's some possibility, at least in the short term with CARES Act dollars, this is something that we believe will warrant tremendous, and frankly already has warranted tremendous philanthropic interest. And I say this all the time, that the only way we're going to change the world is through public-private partnerships. and that philanthropy is a great way to take risks that you might not want us to take with your tax dollars, but to study the impacts, to really show what happens, and to also adjust these types of programs into something that then can become a publicly funded policy. Mayor Tubbs, talk about the involvement of the philanthropic community, and also talk about your evaluation design, because you set out to really answer some questions.
Yeah, no, thank you, Mayor. And I think I share the same thinking that to do the radical things that are necessary to make sure that we all at least have our basic necessities met, that philanthropy has to partner with public entities to test it. Because we know taxpayer dollars are precious resources, but to make sure they're used efficiently. And we also know that charity is not justice. So once we get the proof of concept, then it's time to have a policy conversation around, okay, we have the proof of concept, we've evaluated, we've learned, how do we make this policy? Because programs aren't policy. So we're under no illusions for that. So as part of this network, we're saying two things as Mayors for Guaranteed Income. We're saying, number one, we are willing to pilot in our cities this idea using philanthropy, and where acceptable and when possible, or if necessary, using public funds. I think with CARES Act dollars, we can't do 18 months, we can't do 10 months, but we can do something in terms of direct cash assistance. I know many mayors have been doing that, like Mayor Schaaf, with rental assistance, with childcare assistance, et cetera. In addition to that, in Stockton, for our pilot, we were able to get a grant from the Economic Security Project, and that was helpful to kind of get the idea off the ground, give my council time to come on board to the idea, and also to allow the program to have autonomy from the whims and the political nature of city government. And as part of the pilot, we have an exhaustive research design. You can find more about that at stocktondemonstration.org. But essentially, we set out to answer a couple questions. Number one, how is the money spent? Number two, what impact does this have on income volatility? Is knowing how, and one of the biggest learnings for me was that rental assistance, housing vouchers, childcare subsidies, all those things are so important. But the flaw is that there's no bureaucrat, no mayor, no elected that can know for every resident in their city on July 2nd how exactly they need to use money. And the idea of giving the direct cash is to allow people, the agency, to decide, you know what, this much, the rent's looking good, but this emergency happens. I need to have liquid fluid cash for that. And that was something I didn't really understand. And so I started talking to folks in my city. And for every person I talked to, there's a different way they would use $500. That was different than I had considered. I remember one lady said it would really help in the summer. And I was like, why the summer? Your AC bill? She said, in part, but because my kids come home from college during the summer and my food, all my bills go up. And this will give me a lot less anxiety around them coming back. I was like, wow, mind blowing. Anyway, the second question we were answering is the impact on health and how economic insecurity and poverty is deadly. And what impact does it have on levels of stress and anxiety on health indicators that can be measured? And the third question we're asking is, how does this affect kind of feelings of agency and also connection to community? Because oftentimes, particularly for those of us who aren't in government, the only interaction people have with government is punitive in nature. You have to pay this bill, you have this ticket, you're upset about this pothole, etc. And this is like a different way of government saying, no, we see that you're contributing, you're a part of this society. Here's part of our new social contract. Here is no strings attached, money for you. We trust you to be intelligent enough, and we're going to give you the agency to make the decisions necessary for you and your family. And then in the chat, thank you, Mayor Schaaf. You have great staff. There's a dashboard where every single month we update with spending data, with demographic data. And what was interesting is that we looked at pre-COVID versus post-COVID. In pre-COVID, 36% of all expenditures were for food. Post-COVID, 46% of all expenditures were for food, meaning that in times of pandemic, folks needed that cash for something as basic to survival as food in the Central Valley, in the breadbasket of the world. So I think for me, the findings thus far have illustrated to me just how brutal our economy is to a large swath of our population, to a lot of us. And B, also, it does not have to be that way. Um, I know that was really long, so.
No, we never get tired of listening to you. Some of the questions that we got in advance, one, I do want to clarify that Oakland has not yet done its basic Oakland pilot. By being a founding member of Mayors for Guaranteed Income, I have committed to designing and raising the funds to run a pilot, but that has not been done yet. And so certainly if you are interested, please contact our office if you have opinions. But part of why we're interested in doing this with other mayors from throughout the country is so that we can actually align our different pilots to ask different questions, to really look at an evaluative framework that covers all of our 11 very unique communities, so that the lessons we learn could potentially inform federal policy. That is the end goal, influencing federal policy, or at least starting here in California. Now, Mayor Tubbs, some other questions that we got in advance raised concerns that guaranteed income could possibly, for lack of a better word, make people lazy, that it could disincentivize people working to advance their earning capability or finishing a degree and getting more education. You told me a story that actually suggests that it's just the opposite, that basic income can actually empower educational attainment as well as advancement in career. Can you share that with folks?
Yeah, so I'm nerdy first and talk about other studies that were done before sharing this story. So there's studies done of different pilots in different countries, and what they found is that if folks stop working or they work less, it's because they're availing themselves of educational opportunities. In our community college systems and our four-year systems, and there's people who are taking the bare minimum number of units because they have to work to support themselves. So I would argue in that case, having an income floor that allows you to devote yourself full-time to studies so that you're able to get the education you need to make an impact and to get a career versus a job is money well spent. And then I think number two, as we're talking about amounts, I know Oakland's expensive. Like $500, $1,000, $2,000 is not enough to supplement or to replace work. Like $500, $1,000, $2,000 is not enough for anyone to live on, much less live on comfortably. But what it is, it allows people to have a foundation to build upon. And what we found in Stockton are that people, again, students took the money to quit driving Uber so they could focus on their community college studies. That parents use the money to pay for tutoring for their children. That people see the $500 as a way to invest tangibly in themselves in the short term to bring long-term dividends to themselves and their families long after the pilot and program stops. And I would also say, I think part of the conversation about basic income is also part of this wider conversation we're having in a time of civil unrest. And it's that we have different expectations of people's behavior based on our own biases. For example, we give money and tax breaks and incentives all the time to those who have a lot. And I'm not hating on them. I'm just saying if we could do it for those with the most, we should afford the same benefit of the doubt to those who have more to gain from having real opportunities. So again, if we give tax cuts to billionaires, we're not saying we're going to stop innovating. When we give tax cuts to the top, we say it's going to trickle down for all of us. Like actually incentivizing them, giving them money will create jobs. Giving them money will create income. Giving them money will bring back the economy. And I'm saying we have decades of research that shows that's a false notion. But if we flipped it on the head and said, hey, what if we did the same thing with a trickle up sort of approach? And then we will see more jobs created. We will see our businesses thriving. And we will see just how folks, again, are naturally have drive, are working incredibly hard. And oftentimes, as a response to a system that doesn't have opportunity, you may see some dysfunctional behavior that many will call laziness or lack of motivation. But oftentimes, it's a response to a structure, a society, and a system that doesn't really give opportunity no matter how hard you work. Why would I want to work 2 jobs and not pay rent just to work? Like I empathize with folks who say that, like Mayor Tubbs, do this, do that, do this, and still not be able to pay the rent. So I think a guaranteed income is a way to actually help get rid of valid excuses and say, well, hey, in this instance, you now have an income floor. There's now cash. You now have some opportunity. Now, what will you do with it?
Yeah, and while Oakland has not run a pilot of basic income, it's kind of disappointing. Y Combinator had started running a basic income pilot in Oakland, which I was extremely supportive of, but they ended up moving it to a different city. But we have had things like the Brilliant Baby program of the Oakland Promise, or the Family Independence Initiative that was founded by Maurice Miller Lim. And these are programs that do give unconditional cash. And again, for people who question the overall premise, think of all the governmental spending on each and every one of these social safety net programs and the compliance with each one. And again, how non-tailored they are to a person's actual needs to not just get by, but to gain economic independence and security. And so those programs, while they aren't basic income, they do involve unconditional cash payments. And we have seen tremendous advancements and a move towards financial independence when we trust people to make their decisions with the money, when they know what they need to do and invest in to move forward. And also it's far more efficient. Again, we're not suggesting that this replace the safety net, but we are suggesting that this is a part of ending poverty and ending economic disparities. With that, Mayor Tubbs, here's some questions. And again, please pick the ones that are relevant to you. These are ones that have come in live as we've been talking. Some of these are going to be for our next speaker in a little bit, the ones about macro, but please take on any that you see here that are interesting to you.
Yeah, someone asked, is this a trial or ongoing? So in Stockton, it was an 18-month pilot that was supposed to end in July, but we've actually extended it, thanks to some philanthropic help, till next year to really observe the impacts and the differential impacts, or just how important a basic income is, particularly in times of pandemics, which I think is an important point, because we treat these things as once in a century, and they are individually. But every year there's some sort of pandemic, whether it's a health pandemic or some sort of natural disaster, earthquake, fire, hurricane, etc. Every year or every other year, there's some sort of event that disrupts the economy, that forces people to bunker down, that disrupts people being able to work, and people still have to pay and survive it and ensure that they're providing for their families. So I think I'm excited to see how these next 6 months makes the case that a guaranteed income is really part of building economic resiliency, and it has to be part of our national resiliency strategy as a response to disasters. And then there's a question, how will we make sure guaranteed income is actually guaranteed for a significant period of time? Major benefits of guaranteed income are only realized if it's something you can count on and plan around. I agree wholeheartedly, and that's why we're taking a two-pronged approach. That in the here and now, we know that people need anecdotes, people need stories to really see it, make it real. There has to be a demand from the top grassroots to reach our friends in DC. So that's why all the mayors have committed to piloting something now. Not that it's going to solve everything and not that it's going to help every resident, but it will help advance the narrative which we need to get to our friends in Congress who have the power to do something that's lasting. And when the bills that we're advocating for is one put forth by our senator, Senator Kamala Harris, that talks about $2,000 a month for as long as this COVID-19 pandemic lasts. And I know that's not forever, but it's a lot further than we are today. And I think that's a great win, a great first step. And I would encourage everyone to reach out to your senator and tell her your support, tell your friends, and really help move the rest of the California congressional delegation to supporting her bill as well. And then There's a
Mayor Tubbs,
question.
the question about formerly incarcerated. Were
Yeah.
any of the participants in your pilot formerly incarcerated? What did we learn about that?
Yeah, so I had the final research report isn't done, but there are formerly incarcerated people in our demonstration. There are undocumented people that are part of our demonstration. That there's people who represent the cross section of our city, and I think particularly with the formerly incarcerated people, formerly incarcerated individuals, I was glad to see them as part of the program, because some of this conversation about work is not realizing, as you all realize. I see your work on this, Mayor Schaaf. I know Derek's. I think I saw Derek on the call, who's running for council, who also has done great work with recidivism and understanding the barriers to folks working. So if you have a record, it's hard to find a job. So even if you want to work, you have to find someone who equally wants to hire you. So absolutely, from the incarcerated people, I'm a part of this program, and I don't have the exact anecdotes and exact stories, because we have 125 people in the program, but they're research, so they're not allowed to protect the integrity of the research. But there's 5 or 6 are part of a storytelling core, and those are the stories I was able to mention. There are individuals who got the same amount of money, but they're not part of the research evaluation, so they're able to talk to press, they're able to come to events, they're able to share their stories, and a lot of them talk about how the $500 has been helpful for them in providing for their families.
And Mayor Tubbs, that's because you did a randomized control study. And so the results of this evaluation are going to be truly significant on a national level, because you took the time and expense to do what is considered, the most valid type of evaluation possible. It's very exciting.
We did random, and part of it, Mayor, as you know, is sometimes you get in trouble for doing good. So I said, if I picked the 125 people, because I know stories, I know people, I know who really use it, 315,000 people would be upset with me. So luckily, our research team created a process by which the majority of the city, 75% of the city, qualified, were randomly submitted letters. They balanced it so it reflects the diversity of the city in terms of age, race, demographics, income. So there's people making more than 50K, people making less than 50K, people working, people not working, etc. And I think, to your point, it will really show how people are, you can trust people, that the vast majority of people are rational actors. And with anything and with everything, there'll be a couple people who may not use it the right way, or how you would use it, or who waste it, etc. But you can't deny the majority something, because a couple folks are making decisions differently than what we would determine to be good. And then
I say there's some good questions here. I know there's one about rent. Have you noticed rent going up, or is it important that people realize that this is not a panacea? It's important we continue to have tenant protections, the basic social safety nets. In California, I believe you and I were both big supporters of a statewide rent stabilization law that went into effect this January, that prevents excessive increases to rent. And so those are all important pieces. But there's some fun questions in here for you, Mayor Tubbs. What are you excited for?
Yeah, I think what I'm most excited for is the fact that there's going to be a course of mayors, of leaders like Mayor Schaaf, who are looked upon literally nationally. When we go to conferences, people are like, what's it doing, right? So I think having all these different voices as part of the conversation, saying like, our folks deserve economic security, and then no answer is unacceptable. And not only are we calling on you to do something, we're challenging ourselves to do something with the resources we have or can marshal. And that's how much we believe in this idea. As Mayor Schaaf mentioned, you have, of course, great mayors from the state of California. You have Mayor Schaaf, Mayor Garcetti, Mayor Garcia, Mayor Brown. But you also have Mayor Lumumba in Jackson, Mississippi, Melvin Carter in St. Paul, Adrian Perkins in Shreveport, Steve Benjamin in Columbia, Keisha Bottoms in Atlanta, Victoria Wooders in Tacoma, the mayor of Pittsburgh. There's a mayor, I should know the city, a mayor from Rhode Island that's joining it. It's the entire U.S.
Jorge Alerza from Providence.
But not Jorge. I'm sure he'll join, but wasn't Jorge. I know Jorge will. I'm sure he'll join. But then there's also the entire U.S. Conference of Mayors, bipartisan, passed a resolution affirming everything we're talking about unanimously. So I'm excited to see sort of this idea that was rooted in some of the folks we look up to, rooted in the legacy of civil rights, and rooted in people from California, from Northern California, from Stockton, many of whom worked in Oakland or actually live in Oakland, who are now becoming the vanguards of what a new social safety net could look like. And that just makes me really proud. And then I see a question about, you answered the rent question beautifully, but I'll just say again, this is not meant to be a panacea for every single ill. And we need a guaranteed income, just like we need rent stabilization, just like we need affordable housing for everyone, just like we need tougher eviction laws, just like we need right to counsel for eviction. Like, we need all these things. But a guaranteed income is a great, huge first step, and will help as we seek for political answers to those thorny questions, which may take some time, unfortunately, to get to. I love this. How does macro affect assistance program income requirements? So how does like SSI, SSDI, unemployment, Section 8, do they disqualify? So what we were able to do with our pilot is to work with all those systems that are administered at a state or county level to make sure that it did not displace, replace, or kick them off their benefits. So I think that's important. And then in the Marriage for Guaranteed Income Network, we're very clear that this is to add to the existing social safety net. That we don't want to get rid of all these programs, that we can have all these programs and afford a guaranteed income for everyone. So the folks in the Stockton pilot, they weren't kicked off of their benefits, because we knew after 18 months they still might need them. But the hope is that with a little bit of extra economic stimulus, folks are able to get off those programs faster because they have more opportunity, more resources, and more of a chance to build the coalition of supports needed to exit some of these safety net programs. So absolutely, I really appreciate that question. And then can I find additional information? If you go to StocktonDemonstration.org, StocktonDemonstration.org, you can find everything. And I mean everything. You can find how people spend money every month. You can find a storytelling bank where you hear from the people themselves who speak more eloquently than I ever could about how something as small as $500 has helped them in the past 18 months. You can also go to marriageforagi.org to see all the mayors that are part of this network, including your mayor, who again is a founding mayor. I keep saying that because it's easy to jump on board once it's hot, once everyone does it. It's harder to say, oh, this may not work. It may be part of the presidential platform. It may not, but it's the right thing to do. And Mayor Schaaf, as she generally does, just exhibited leadership and said, no, this is important for the folks in Oakland. I've been talking about this a long time. It fits in with the work we've been doing with rental assistance, with brilliant babies. It fits into how I'm thinking about racial equity in my city. And she was probably the easiest mayor. I didn't even have to get on the phone. She said, done. Yeah, duh.
All right. Well, Mayor Tubbs, it's such a pleasure to have you. I want to invite you now to give some closing thoughts. If you feel like it, one of the last questions was kind of, what does this cost taxpayers eventually? I think to answer the question, what does it cost us all? What does economic insecurity, poverty, and economic disparity cost us? Because there's a tremendous cost in that. But please give us your parting thoughts before we relinquish you to your family.
No, thank you. And I definitely, please send me the notes from this alternative, the conversation you're having next around using alternative means to respond to non-criminal things. It's something that we're working on in Stockton. Need models to make it really tangible for my folks. So please, I'm looking forward. I know this conversation is being recorded, but looking forward to those notes. And poverty, economic insecurity is so incredibly expensive. If you look at, I know there's a lot of conversation in this country around just how much we spend on policing. And part of that is because it's as a response to the levels that we haven't spent on poverty. And that once we abolish poverty, once there's no poverty, we'll see all the things that make people think we need to keep increasing and keep increasing and keep increasing the amount of officers we have, not real. And that's why this conversation, I think, fits so perfectly with this moment. This is actually a way of building a society that's less punitive, that requires less punishment, and that has more opportunity, which I think we all share as a goal. In terms of what it costs taxpayers, it'll cost taxpayers less than what this Great Depression we're walking into is going to cost. It will cost taxpayers less than the Iraq and Afghanistan war. It will cost taxpayers less than or equal to the $2 trillion in tax cuts we gave in 2017. It will cost taxpayers less than what we pay between all our systems to deal with the fact that folks are working incredibly hard, but can't make basic needs, can't meet basic needs: housing, shelter, food, transportation. I think it's also just a great opportunity that the last time we had a Great Depression was 1930s, and we responded with a bold New Deal, which wasn't perfect. It excluded Black folks and other people of color, but it was a flag in the ground that moved our country forward in terms of what is part of what makes us American. What does our social contract mean? That was 90 years ago. We are now in 2020. We cannot live in 2020 in the age of rapidly expanding technologies, in a time of pandemics, and still be operating with a safety net that was built in 1935, a safety net that was built for the benefits of the internet to research and look at best practice. Like, like the fact that we're still operating in something built, and you wouldn't drive a 1936 car. You would not use a 1936 computer because it didn't exist. You wouldn't use a 1936 phone. Did they exist? They had cell phones, didn't exist. So why would we just allow ourselves to be complacent with not keeping up with the times and operating this 1935 social contract? And this is our moment. This is our time. We see it from the protests in the streets. We see it even when the president of the United States is saying, hey, we got to give people money. This is our opportunity to really make King's dreams of economic justice and civil rights married together a reality, and a time to make good again on something rooted in Oakland, the Black Panthers, who saw 50 years ago the need in this country to provide a basic guaranteed income floor for all people, and watch and see how we benefit when we unleash the potential, the entrepreneurial spirit, and really unlock opportunity for everyone. Because as the mayor mentioned, we understand that the economy is not just green, that there's real racial disparities. The fact that in 2020, white folks have 10-to-1 wealth gap ratio between Black folks, I think it's 8-to-1 with Latinx folks. So the fact that Black families with college degrees have less wealth, makes 70 cents on the dollar in terms of wealth, than white families with high school diploma. That we have, that's expensive. That costs us a lot. So I'm looking forward to working with you, Mayor Schaaf, to continuing to push the envelope to move us to where we're really aligned with the values we've written on paper, called our Constitution, our Declaration of Independence. And again, thank you, Oakland, for the leadership you all continually show, particularly in times like this, about the need to demand change, the need to push for change, and the need to work together to do it. So again, thank you all, and have a good night.
Thank you, Mayor Tubbs. It is always so fantastic working with you. Thank you for your national leadership on this issue. Again, guaranteed income, an idea whose time has come. It has been around forever, but now is this moment that I think we all feel that transformational change is possible. And speaking of transformational change, our next speaker, David Harris, is the leader of the incredible Urban Strategies Council, a thought leader in just urban transformation, issues of equity for many, many decades. Founded by Angela Glover Blackwell, who also is the founder of Policy Link, David Harris is carrying on a fantastic tradition of being a thoughtful, analytical partner that is working with the city to advance the interests, not just of Oaklanders, but of all urban communities across the country. 1 year ago, the city of Oakland decided to start the process to stand up an alternative to police response. This is not something that we just thought of within the last month. This is work that has been going on in this city for a very long time, recognizing that we have to move from a law enforcement mentality to one of trauma-informed public health and care, and that Oakland is a place that is ready to do that. And so 1 year ago, the city council approved a budget to authorize a study, an implementation study, inspired by an organization in Eugene, Oregon, the Whitebird Clinic that runs the Cahoots mobile crisis response. And so David Harris is here to tell us about what his 1 year process studying an implementation plan in Oakland looked like, and how excited we are all as the city council just approved an even larger budget than you had proposed, Mr. Harris, nearly $3 million to start the implementation of macro in Oakland so that we can have non-police response in the many, many cases where it is far more appropriate. So David Harris, welcome to the town hall tonight.
Thank you, Mayor Shaft, and I appreciate the opportunity to share our work with the community. The stories that we've heard all resemble the same kind of situation. There's someone in the middle of the street screaming or having some sort of mental health incident. There's a situation at an encampment that is a nonviolent situation, but in the end, in both scenarios, 4 or 5 police officers show up with guns and badges, not necessarily implementing or using de-escalation techniques, and things have the risk of both bringing harm to the person who's in need of help, as well as building on and destroying the already frayed relationship that exists between police and many in our community in Oakland. We began this work with the goal of looking at what kind of alternative responses could be implemented, particularly in cases where there were non-violent, non-criminal related calls to 911. The 911 system in Oakland gets about 1,300 to 1,500 calls a day, and many of those do not require the response, an armed response of police. And so we started this work, and I'll share some slides right now that give you an overview of what we've done. Next slide, please. As the mayor said, we learned about this model called Cahoots in Oregon. However, advocates in Oakland for at least the last decade have been really arguing for and proposing alternatives to the police response to nonviolent 911 calls. Cahoots was a model in Oregon, Eugene, that a number of our elected leaders and community leaders learned about, and they were invited to Oakland to do a presentation about their model. More can be learned about Cahoots in a Wall Street Journal article that we'll attach in the chat section. And as the mayor said, the city council funded urban strategies to research the feasibility of a model like Cahoots in Oakland. And once again, I must say, our work only stands on the shoulders of those advocates and organizations that have been pressing and working on this issue for well over a decade. We brought together community organizations, over 25 different groups that formed a community advisory table to help us focus on 3 areas in terms of our research. When we looked at how the 911 system currently operates, what are some of the issues with dispatch being able to sort out these calls, being able to refer the right people to the right calls. We also then looked at comparative models of alternative police responses. Both the county has some that are being implemented. They're not 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. There are some that are being implemented in the state. Some of our local partners, like the Anti-Police Terrorism Project, has a project in Sacramento that they're implementing. And then there are models nationally in other cities and also international models. We shared that work with the Coalition for Police Accountability and also the Police Accountability Commission, and put together a final report that was presented to the city and council, the mayor, about 2 weeks ago. That report, full report, can be found on our website. The next slide. So the goals of what we're trying to do is pretty straightforward. One is having a non-police response to nonviolent, non-felony calls. A model that's unique to Oakland. We recognize that that models existing in other places, particularly Eugene, which is certainly very much different demographically and historically from Oakland, had to be designed that would be appropriate for Oakland. Another one concern and goal was to improve OPD, Oakland Police Department response time to urgent calls by more efficiently allocating resources where the nonviolent calls are dealt with in an alternative way. That leaves the police to do the more urgent things that they're set up to be doing. But we also believe that it had to be a model that's based on community members helping their own community. That is aligned with our overall goal that these type of models and programs overall promote and advance community health. If we think of what a healthy community is in the broadest way possible, then we realize that many of the interventions and systems we have set up can first be handled by community people in a sort of shared responsibility with each other. And that's an important consideration. And lastly, it's a program that can
David, you accidentally muted yourself. Unmute yourself.
Yes, next slide, sorry. Technology issues. We looked at the comparison of the two models. And when we say macro, that is our own acronym for Mobile Assistance Community Responders of Oakland. And so the main differences between what we're proposing for macro compared to what's going on in Oregon is that first off, we want counselors who don't necessarily have to be certified. We want staff to be paid well enough so that this does provide residents workforce opportunities and the opportunity to get above living wage jobs. The whole goal of having community engagement in the process with training focused on de-escalation, safety, access to a robust network of referral organizations, and also building this within the resource of our newly formed Department of Violence Prevention, which is really looking at the city's overall strategy for violence prevention and the ability of macro to be integrated with the work that the DVP is doing and planning, because one program in and of itself is not going to address either the issues around the relationship between police and community, the overinvestment of money for public safety and police, as well as the need for the kind of social education and other economic development services. And lastly is the idea of focusing on collecting data and results from the beginning of the pilot. Many of the models we looked at really did not have a lot of data behind them yet. And we need to have a program that we are learning from as we're doing, because it's going to require a lot of course corrections and refinements before it could be expanded to the full city. Next slide. We have outlined an example workflow of what happens when a 911 call comes in and how we envision a different response for these 911 calls. This diagram can be found in our full report, and the link to that report on our website is included in the chat section. And then lastly, final slide, please. The next steps we have are, we still have some additional community engagement that we're working to build in, particularly from individuals most impacted, particularly engagement in some of the communities and neighborhoods where the project might be piloted and implemented. The city will issue an RFP to identify the organization to implement the pilot. We'll set up the monitoring and evaluation systems, and then we implement it. We see the impact and we measure the impact. So, Mayor Schaaf, that is an overview of the work that we've done to help bring this idea to fruition. I think it's important that we recognize that the whole process of reimagining policing and reinventing it will take a number of different strategies and initiatives, and this is just one, and it needs to be all part of a strategy, a framework towards building healthy communities in our city. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you, David Harris, the amazing leader of Urban Strategies Council. And thank you for saying that this is just one piece of how we see reimagining public safety. I continue to say that I believe that we have several tasks in front of us. One is to restore Black wealth. Another is to remove structural racism, which again, people got a little sample of from our director of the Department of Race and Equity, Darlene Flynn, who was in our last town hall. And then finally, to both reform policing as well as replace the police. And that is where macro is going to be such an incredible and powerful model. It is really replacing the police where a gun and a badge are just not the right response, where care and community are the right response. So David, you got a few questions ahead of time that you should feel free to respond to. I know I saw one, and let's put up the thought exchange information again. Again, we welcome anyone who is viewing live to text or click on the link that you see in your social media to send your questions that you have about macro, again, an only in Oakland mobile crisis response from the community that is getting ready to be stood up. So please send your questions. I know a question that came up for the previous speaker that I think was really intended for this part of the program was a question about how is the city of Oakland assessing how many people want fewer police the same amount of police or more police? And I will just to quickly answer that simple question. We do conduct a major survey, a scientific survey of the city every 2 years in preparation for our budget process. So we are actually getting ready to conduct that survey again, probably in this fall. I can tell you that the survey conducted 2 years ago showed that the vast majority of Oaklanders actually wanted more police, not less police. And I wouldn't be surprised if some of that has changed, but that doesn't necessarily mean just because people want more police, they don't also want better and more strategically used policing, more constitutional and respectful policing. And so that is certainly part of this overall reimagining of public safety. But David, you got a couple questions ahead of time. Did you want to take a chance to respond to those?
Sure, and quickly in response to the point you just raised about assessing the level of police investment that we have, I think two things really jumped out to me during the course of our research. One was that Oakland per capita spends more in police than many of the major cities in the United States. So it's not an issue about the amount of investment as much as it's about smart investing. When you look at the second figure in terms of overtime that we spend on policing, it tells us that there are a lot of efficiencies that can be gained, and we really have to rethink the role of policing, particularly as I mentioned, in terms of the overall goal of building a healthy community. We have to empower residents and give them the support and resources they need so that many of the challenges and conflicts that arise can be dealt with at a level that doesn't require escalation to the police. Not every problem requires someone with a gun and badge showing up. And two of the questions I think that stood out, well, one was repeated about will there be a different phone number than 911? During the course of our study, we both, as I mentioned, looked at how these calls come into 911. They're about 13 to 1,500 a day. There really is not a protocol for evaluating what might be nonviolent, non-criminal, and so that is an area of capacity that the department is going to have to build and dispatch. But there could be, for example, another phone line that's set up just for these type of calls where they don't involve weapons, they don't involve violence, and people may have a lot more trust in using that versus some of the outcomes for calling 911. We know in some communities, communities that both are over-policed as well as communities that need the police, that there are real serious trust issues when it comes to calling 911 because you never know at the end what's going to happen when they arrive. And so there can be alternative protocols set up. The second thing was more of a culture question about the training of police and the issue of anti-bias training, the use of force protocols, rubber bullets, etc. On the latter, I know that the Police Accountability Commission and the department are reviewing the use of force protocols, and there will be, I guess, there will be some recommendations regarding use of rubber bullets, etc.
Actually, if I may, David, Oakland has disallowed the use of rubber bullets for years. Rubber bullets are not in the possession of the Oakland police. The Oakland police are not allowed to use rubber bullets. However, when mutual aid gets called into Oakland, other departments may in fact be using rubber bullets. And that is something that in fact happened recently. And so, but just to be clear, for Oaklanders, the Oakland Police Department does not allow rubber bullets.
Yeah, and I think that question exemplifies some of the public education and information that has to be done. Also, two people asked about rubber bullets, so they must be that they're being used. And in terms of the anti-bias training, we talk about defunding, disinvesting, all of these strategies regarding the police, which I think many have to be considered, especially in light of the other needs we have in our city. But money does not change culture. And in terms of the culture change that's required by the police department, that's going to happen not just by training, but by policy and by accountability. That is why programs like Macro is just a program. It's not a policy. As Mayor Tubbs said, we're going to need policy and structure change. And there's going to need to be a lot more done that goes beyond just this alternative response to 911 nonviolent calls.
Great. Well, thank you, David. And I think we've gotten some new questions in from the live viewers. So while our staff puts those up on the screens, I can add that 2 weeks from tonight, on July 16th, our featured guest is going to be Chief Ron Davis. Chief Davis was a captain. He was the Inspector General for the Oakland Police Department a long time ago, but he's best known for working under President Obama as the head of the Office of Community Policing. He oversaw all federal consent decrees. He also led the task force on 21st century policing that President Obama put together following Ferguson. He was most recently appointed by Governor Gavin Newsom to co-chair, along with another Oaklander, Latifah Simon, a task force to look at advancing police reforms at the statewide level. And just like the question with rubber bullets exemplifies, it is really confusing when each and every city has different standards. Oakland has some very specific trainings and policies that many other cities don't have. I think Chief Davis will be in a good position to explain to people where Oakland is relative to other cities. But more importantly, the need for reform at the state and federal level, and the different pieces of legislation that are in front of our legislators right now that we all can advocate for their passage. And those will be truly powerful and transformative for policing everywhere. So David, here's some questions. They're up on the screen and the viewers can see them as well. Please feel free to take a stab at answering any of these things. I know some of these got a little confused with universal basic income. Macro is not the basic income program. It is a non-police crisis response program, very different. But David, please feel free to answer any of these that you'd like.
Sure. There was a question regarding how will the Macro program be rolled out and in which communities. The City Council funded Macro to begin the pilot implementation this year. There may be, in terms of the city contracting process, it may take a couple of months to complete that and identify the correct provider who will be able and has the capacity to implement the program. We've recommended a number of communities, starting in East and West Oakland and North Oakland. We think that this model, while it's a pilot, needs to be able to show some impact in a couple of different areas in the city, so that so that people can actually observe the impact and see that it's working. I'm very confident that the Department of Violence Prevention under the new chief will be able to implement this process and also align macro with a number of the other initiatives like Oakland Unite and like the work that's being done to prevent domestic violence and child sexual exploitation and trafficking. The department is looking at layering many of the already existing strategies and approaches and several neighborhoods, so that we're not just spread out in this work occurring in an isolated way. One thing that Oakland is program rich, and also has great minds in terms of innovating for social change and social justice, and I'm confident that we have the folks in the community that will be able to implement the macro pilot. In terms of the whole issue about the second question about collecting data on police staffing, that is something I know that is the Police Accountability Commission has been working on with the department. In terms of the whole issue of defunding the police, we definitely believe that policing needs to be re-envisioned, reimagined. We also recognize that, especially in this pandemic moment, we're seeing anecdotally in other cities increased numbers of arrests and stops, particularly of people of color, and that occurred quite a bit during when communities had stay-at-home orders. However, I want to be clear that if you're living, in a community that is constantly under siege, where there's violence every day, and you're struggling with basic needs and stuff, there are times when people need the police, and in my own family, if I talked with different generations, we'd probably come up with different assessments of whether we want to eliminate the police or keep the police. My point about the police and the historical breach that's occurred in the relationship between impacted communities and the police is going to require culture change. It's going to require reinvestment and reimagining of the way they operate. It's going to require training, and it's going to require leadership to see all of this through. And so we have our work cut out for us, and I'm confident that if we, under our leadership, that if we stay the course on our goals, we can get this done.
Great, thank you for that. I see a question that I think is for me, which was, given revenue projections collapsing, what have you done to reduce the operational costs of Oakland governance prophylactically? And the answer is we have frozen about 50 positions that are vacant. So that is reducing services, but it is definitely cutting the operational costs. We have made significant reductions in expenditures, for example, eliminating all travel budgets, cutting and delaying certain contracts. We also released more than 400 temporary part-time workers. And we are also working to very much maximize our ability to get FEMA reimbursement, as well as reimbursement for other response work we've done specific to the pandemic. We've been very successful at getting a number of competitive grants in Oakland, and we also were very pleased that after several years of building up a rainy day fund, we had that fund available so that a significant cut to services would not need to be made. And then relative to police, the final adopted budget cut the police department's budget by $14.3 million. So that was definitely the largest cut, $14.3 million cut from the police department. There's a question, and I guess also not everyone probably knows about Oakland Unite or the Department of Violence Prevention. There's some questions about that. Because Mayor Tubbs was our previous guest, I do want to lift up Ceasefire, which is more of a public health approach to gun violence. And Oakland Unite is a very important piece of that, where we send violence interrupters into the community, trusted messengers, as well as life coaches to really help people make the choice to not engage in violence, but to, as we say, live and be free. But Mr. Harris, do you want to add anything about the question about the emphasis on monitoring by DVP and how they don't want it to be too bureaucratic or program spirit killing?
Yes, in the end, one of the parts of our research looked at the type of organization that's going to be required and necessary to implement the pilot. The city's money for the pilot is being housed in the DVP, but the DVP is not implementing the pilot. The DVP will monitor it for quality control, for making sure that the program meets the goals and objectives that have been set out by the council and the mayor and the implementation. But the key is going to be identifying the right provider who has a degree of trust and relationships in the community, that has a robust network where they can help refer people who are in need. They need to have some capacity in dealing with mental health and substance abuse issues. We don't, we have someone who might be having a substance abuse or mental health issue, and we're expecting a police officer who shows up to be trained as a substance abuse counsel, a mental health advocate, and also know first aid, as well as be able to handle a gun and a violent situation. That is not the appropriate response. And we have to build a system that focuses on support, on de-escalation, on building healthy communities. We know that police departments, by their very nature and history, have only propped up the issues we're struggling with right in front of us today, whether it's structural racism, whether it's police violence, etc. The police are going to have to really look at ways that that system can be restructured and changed. There's no doubt about it, but we do need to have alternatives for things that don't go to the police, that really are the foundation for us building a healthy community where we have civic support and responsibility for each other.
I see also a question about small businesses. I know this is not specific to macro, but I will answer it since we have a teeny bit of time. Right now, Alameda County is one of the most restrictive counties in the state. And frankly, other counties that allowed restaurants to fully reopen are now dialing back that permission. There is very restrictive reopening of restaurants right now, only for outdoor dining. The dining has to be outdoors, it has to be socially distanced, and other safety protocols must be followed. And as far as what the city is doing to support this responsible and healthy, very limited reopening of restaurants and other businesses, we have created an instant online permitting process that is free, that does not require anyone to go to City Hall. You can just get it online, which allows restaurants to use their sidewalks as well as the parking space in front of their stores. We're also working with different business organizations to consider full or partial closure of streets to, again, further allow businesses to utilize the outdoor space, the public right-of-way, our roads, our sidewalks, so that we can try to, in a healthy and responsible way, bring some of the jobs and activities back. But again, I want to caution everyone that we have seen a tremendous spike in COVID-19 cases over this last week. While it has not been as bad in Alameda County as in other parts of the state, we are not one of the counties that the governor just put on a special watch status. We have to celebrate the 4th of July differently this year. A number one cause of the recent spikes is family and friend celebrations. And so please let us celebrate our independence and freedom at home this year. Call people, Zoom with them, but we are trying to be very responsible and measured. We have to put people before profits. We have to put health first. But thank you for that question. And in District 6, I'm going to ask our interns to put in our dear friend on Avenal in District 6. I believe it's ShopRite. The grocery store, it was the site of our Essential Places press conference, and it is a wonderful neighborhood market in the heart of District 6. So let's put that in the chat as a place for quality food. And I know that there's a lot of efforts in District 6, thanks to a $28.3 million grant that Oakland just won to actually expand actual produce growing. We actually have farms in East Oakland. Big kudos to Planting Justice, which was a big piece of our Transformative Climate Communities grant. That was just awarded $28.3 million. So you're going to have just grown in East Oakland fresh produce coming to you soon. All right. David, I know we just have 6 minutes left. Can you please give us your closing thoughts as we are all excited as we move to this reimagining safety in Oakland in a very Oakland-driven way?
Sure. There was one question that I think you answered, but I want to reiterate. It asks for about the money to invest in the pilot. And I do believe that was part of the 14 some odd $1 million that was cut from the police department. There are going to be other strategies and initiatives that will come up that will be looked at over time, I'm sure. This was one, however, as the mayor mentioned, we had begun work on so that we were pretty much in the right place at the right time, because this movement to reimagine and re-envision policing is not going to go away. And it's something that all of our residents are going to have to be invested in, either with their ideas or with their support, but certainly looking at ways where not only will it make us a safer city and a healthier city, but it will save lives, and to the extent that we can even make it safer for police, fire, other first responders who are out there. I believe moving away from the badge and the gun mentality that permeates our society will even make them feel safer and healthier. So, thank you.
Thank you, David Harris. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. Again, our next town hall will be 2 weeks from tonight. We will be featuring Chief Ron Davis. No one is probably better known nationally around police reform than he is. He led Barack Obama's 21st Century Policing Task Force following Ferguson. He was recently appointed by Governor Gavin Newsom to lead police reform here in California. There are many exciting bills and pieces of legislation at the state and federal level that we all can get involved in supporting that will really advance true justice and safety for all of us. Again, thank you for joining us tonight. Mayor Michael Tubbs, one of my favorite mayors, really talking about reimagining economic security and ending wealth disparity, income inequality. That is part of public safety. And David Harris, your leadership of Urban Strategies Council, your key role in doing a community-led planning process to stand up a mobile response unit that is community-led, that is delivering care to people in need that do not require a law enforcement response. Thank you for your leadership, your continued stewardship of all great ideas and innovations in Oakland. Thank you, everyone.
You're welcome, and thank you, Mayor Schaaf.
Well, thank you. So everyone have a safe 4th of July. Please try and spend it at home. Please encourage anyone who still has fireworks to surrender them at a fire station. They are traumatizing our essential workers, our pets, our veterans, our refugees that have come from war-torn countries. They are dangerous. They are a fire hazard. Please find ways to celebrate this 4th of July in a way that promotes health and safety, but in a way that still kind of celebrates our Oakland spirit. Thank you and have a good night. See you in 2 weeks.